US intelligence contractor Edward Snowden described them as his guardian angels. But now the group of refugees who helped hide Snowden in Hong Kong after he publicly leaked tens of thousands of documents from the US National Security Agency are seeking sanctuary themselves. Lawyers for the group of 3 families who hid Snowden during his time in Hong Kong believe Sri Lankan authorities are trying to illegally arrest them in the territory and bring them back to Sri Lanka, where they fear they will be tortured and abused. Efforts are currently underway to secure asylum status in Canada, where the refugees believe they will be safe from Sri Lankan authorities. Well, on the line now from Hong Kong is the lawyer for 2 of the Sri Lankan refugees, Robert Tibbo. Mr. Tibbo also represents Edward Snowden. Mr. Tibbo, can you tell me exactly what the men you represent fear if they are not granted asylum?
The situation the families are in, first and foremost, is that they had fled their native countries to Hong Kong. They had fled persecution, cruel and inhuman degrading treatment, and also torture. In Hong Kong, there's been a number of refugee or asylum screening systems, and these systems were found in the past to be so unfair that the courts in Hong Kong considered that they were illegal. So the screening systems were modified, and despite the screening systems providing for lawyers for the asylum seekers, and on the surface, the system looks fair. The actual acceptance rate of asylum seekers in Hong Kong is, since 1992, is about 73 cases out of 30,000. And since 2009, there's been 72 cases accepted. And so the acceptance rate is less than 1%. If you round it off, it's approximately 0%. So all of my clients, through the Hong Kong screening system, will eventually, almost with complete certainty, be rejected and then removed back to their countries of origin. Now, I want to explain that the UN Committee Against Torture in Geneva found in its 5th periodical report condemning Hong Kong for a system that has a distinctly high threshold and an almost zero acceptance rate. So from that standpoint, my clients are at risk of almost a certainty of being returned to their home countries, which that can't happen. So myself and fellow Montrealers in Quebec and Canada, we took a view that asylum claims should be filed on behalf of these 3 extraordinary families who sheltered Mr. Snowden. And looking at the circumstances of this family in Hong Kong, I want to give a full context. They have been left destitute in Hong Kong at all material times. In particular, the children have been affected by this. So as Canadians, we felt that with almost no chance of succeeding in their asylum claims, the families with their children left destitute, basically treated in an inhumane and degrading way, that really Hong Kong is not providing what we call state protection. They're not providing the protections that they require. Recently, we discovered that the Sri Lankan Police Criminal Investigation Department, renowned for their standard operating methods of that incorporate torture of civilians, no matter how serious the crime, they had been engaging the Sri Lankan families, extended family in Sri Lanka. They had also landed in Hong Kong, and we have evidence that they were searching for the families here in Hong Kong.
Why have the Hong Kong authorities not tried to prevent this? I mean, presumably they must be aware that Sri Lankan police are operating within their territory.
Not necessarily. The legal procedure, the proper procedure and lawful procedure, if the Sri Lankan police or any other enforcement from Sri Lanka wants to investigate in Hong Kong, they first have to contact the Hong Kong government to notify them of their intentions and basically obtain permission to do so. But from what the Sri Lankan government has said, they said that they didn't have any officers on official business in Hong Kong. But they did admit eventually that they did have officers, plural, in Hong Kong during the period where we say they were here. So it appears that the Sri Lankan officers were in Hong Kong without notifying the Hong Kong government. So it's possible the Hong Kong government didn't know. Now, we've raised this at 2 press conferences. We'd like to know if the Hong Kong government did know or did not. We've raised this with the Hong Kong police, and the police have referred us to the Immigration Department, saying that the Immigration Department is currently investigating the matter. So that's all we know at this stage.
There's no suggestion, I'm assuming you're not suggesting that the Sri Lankan authorities are motivated by the fact that your clients gave refuge to Edward Snowden or not. Can you explain what the motivation was for the refugees in trying to help Snowden and whether he remains in contact with the families today?
Okay, the first part is what the motivations of the Sri Lankan authorities are. I mean, we're not clear on that. What we do know is that once my clients' identities were exposed last September, the Hong Kong authorities, through a government contractor, International Social Services, questioned two of the three families about Mr. Snowden. And when the families refused to answer questions about Mr. Snowden and referred them to me as the lawyer, International Social Services cut off assistance to one of the families completely. No rent, no food, no transport, no clothing. And then another family, their basic needs weren't met. They made written requests, please, can you meet our basic needs? ISS said no after they refused to ask questions. So if the Hong Kong government is interested in Mr. Snowden, it's a certainty that the Sri Lankan authorities, you'd expect that they would be interested in Mr. Snowden.
And are the families in contact with Mr. Snowden at the moment?
The families are in contact with Mr. Snowden through Mr. Snowden's lawyers, so Jonathan Mann and myself. So when I'm in contact with Mr. Snowden or when I visited Mr. Snowden, I've passed on communications to Mr. Snowden and vice versa.
And there's no indication at this stage that the Hong Kong authorities believe that the refugees have committed a criminal offence by giving sanctuary to Mr. Snowden during those 2 weeks that he was in Hong Kong, is there?
Not at all. One thing I should make clear is, first of all, Mr. Snowden was May and June 2013. At all material times, he had a valid visitor's visa, so he was there lawfully. When Mr. Snowden had identified himself through the interview with The Guardian, Glenn Greenwald, the United States indicted him on a number of charges under the Espionage Act for theft. But Mr. Snowden was not considered a fugitive under Hong Kong law because the U.S. had not sent through a properly formalized extradition request. So when Mr. Snowden left Hong Kong, at all material times, he was here lawfully, and he was not considered a fugitive under Hong Kong law. So the asylum-seeking families, these three wonderful families, had not broken any law in sheltering and providing assistance to Mr. Snowden.
And what are the prospects of the refugees you're representing securing asylum in Canada?
The three lawyers that I'm working with, Mr. Marc-André Seguin, Francis Tourigny, and Michael Simpkin, they're all representing the asylum-seeking families who helped Mr. Snowden. These families are in distress. They don't have the protections that are required, and Canada really is in a position to take in these families. As Mr. Trudeau has said repeatedly since last year and early this year, that Canada embraces the opportunity and embraces their commitments as a country that brings in refugees. And these are 7 people that we feel Canadians would want to have in their communities, and we're hopeful that Canada will accept them.
What was the last you heard from the Canadian authorities in relation to their efforts to try and secure asylum?
This is a process that is ongoing, and all I can say is that there's been ongoing communications. And at this stage, we're asking the Canadian government to expedite these applications and to make a decision at the earliest time, if not forthwith. We're asking to make a positive decision to bring them into Canada.
Well, Mr. Tibbo, fascinating case. In the meantime, many thanks for speaking to us on World in Focus.
Thanks so much, Mark. You take care.